Okay, so I'm going to throw this in because it was a question, and I don't want to, you know, maybe just let it go because it's a fair question, right? Like, why do you use so much tape on your model? Like, why don't you just pre-paint all the parts and glue it together? Well, first of all, this is not a kit, so you can't do that, right? Like, you don't build like if you followed the series, you would know that everything's built up because you're designing the model. It's a scratch built model from a photograph or a painting. It's reverse engineered, rough draft is done, and then you start cutting out parts and you start taking the skills that you've acquired over years of practice and you build the model. And when you build a model out of plastic, the beauty of evergreen is if you build it raw, meaning without painting it first as much as you can. I mean, you can't do it with everything. I mean, the toilet in there and the vanity was all built separately and pre-painted and then doweled into place from the top, like down through the ceiling here, right? And the vanity had a sheet of fake wall, so I had a large surface to glue with and just pushed it in with CA on a painted wall. That is the only time I make an exception when I glue painted parts together. And even then, the back of the vanity was raw plastic, all scored with a knife with lots of grooves in it, so it had tooth to bite because CA is a mechanical bond. Same as the paint I scraped. Okay, but the rest of the model, like you want the integrity of weld, right? You want a tight weld. Like, this is a solid model. Like, it even surprises me. Like, because everything was welded. Like, even this door frame, like like it'll flex. See, but it's not going to break that easily because it's welded before I even painted it. I had to mask it off. Of course I did. But that's how I build, right? That's how a lot of advanced modelers build. Like, how are you going to, okay, so here's some example. Okay, so the pony wall had to be drafted and built right onto the base around the pre-painted, well, it wasn't pre-painted yet, but around the floor. And then, as you know, if you've watched the series, this was all used tape, like it was all to me a tape, and then cut out each square, which was simple because the engraving was already there. The knife just glides right down the line, and I just picked out each one, and that's what it takes to get this kind of model. If you want a model like this, you got to use tape, right? The same with here, but I didn't do that. I just taped it over, and then I painted the bar because the bar wasn't built separately. Like, you can't build this bar separately, really. I mean, you can in hindsight, or if this is turned into a kit, that's a different story. But this was built right onto the floor before it was painted on this side, see? It's all procedural, right? Like integrity of the weld. Like, here's one more example. Like the cornice here on the brick. Like, if I pre-paint the brick and pre-paint the cornice, if I know the size and the look that I want, I got to scrape the paint off the bottom of this where the weld is going to be, and I got to scrape the paint off the top where the paint is. And nobody should even at this point even ask why you have to remove the paint before you glue plastic together. So rather than pre-paint the parts, I get a nice tight mushroomed weld on the top here. And then all I did was take a scraper and cleaned out any mushrooming glue. Just cleaned a nice scrape down there. So it's beautiful, nice, clean seam. And then I just go and paint it. And then I mask off, like I paint the brick first. I only masked off this because I didn't want a lot of paint buildup, but I didn't really have to. I could have allowed paint to bleed onto this. But I didn't want oil paint on this because I'm going to spray this with acrylic. You can put oil over acrylic, but you shouldn't put acrylic over oil. So see, there's a method to the madness, right? And that's what this is for. This is paint designed by modelers, right? Albeit in Japan, but there's tape manufactured here in the US as well by modelers or used by modelers, whatever, right? So that's why. So the final taping here is I'll use cheap tape down here, or cheaper. No tape is cheap nowadays, it seems. And then I use the Tamiya because it cuts a fine line. And this will be the last mask that I do, right? Okay, so I'm going to do the stone. I'll try to cover some of it for you. So this is the last mask and the last basic exterior paint now. It's just stonework or granite or whatever material was used. Probably granite, right? A lot of the cornices and upright columns were made of granite back in the day, or cement, concrete. But a lot of this would be probably stonemason granite. Anyway, so I'm going to do the basic procedure. It's about a 3 color. Okay, umber. There's some either deck tan. Yeah, this is deck tan in this case. I just found this sitting over there. I'm going to use that because that'll work. And then there's some blue sea gray. So the idea behind this umber is shadow, right? Okay, dark to light in this case. I like to shoot a little bit of IPA through just to lube things up. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut in some umber. Just call this raw umber, which is just black and brown, right? Any shade of black and brown when it comes to shadow that's going to be dusted over with grays and what have you is all you need, right? You really don't... where's the paint? Okay, come on. Okay, there it is. See how I pull back and it's really wet? And then watch when you just pull, just think in your mind a little tiny bit. And that's what you want. See, so it's always trigger full down for air because you regulate it at your compressor. And then the trigger that you pull back like this, I'll try not to press air at the same time. That's your paint, but you never really, the only time I floor it is to blow dried acrylic out of the tip because it builds up sometimes after a while. Not as much when you're thin like this, but it'll build up. So if you just go, it'll just blow any particle build up and see so that you'll get a nice tight line again, right? See? So that's what you want, right? So I just press all the way down. I just think in my mind and just squeeze and just my finger, right? Muscle memory. Just after practice, you'll just start doing this like second nature, okay? So I want most of my umber underneath this cornice, okay? Because that's where the shadow's going to be. And I don't need really any on the top side because it's sunlight coming down, right? So we're always painting at high noon, right? When we paint a model, just in theory. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to lay some gray on. In this case, I'm just using some dark sea gray by Tamiya. And I customed this color a bit. I might have added a bit of blue in it for some other project. But I never sweat that kind of stuff. Like with umber, like I don't measure ratios. Just black and brown, if you, right? Like either way, 10 or 20%, it doesn't make any difference really. And the same with grays too. Like a lot of these colors that I use, or a lot of colors that we use for weathering, like they're sort of fail-safe, really. You know, it's like, you know, like you're not after Conrail blue or Santa Fe yellow, or you know what I mean? Like you're not paint chipping the model here. You're just putting on a variation of color that are generic enough to be a fair representation of what's going on. Okay, so see, that's quite dark, eh? See? But it should look pretty good, I think. And then when we highlight it, it'll probably look even better. Okay, so now I just want to point out, like, I don't want to shoot any gray underneath here. Okay, so I'm going to shoot sort of straight at the model, or the cornice in this case, and then over the top, okay? And then these vertical columns, well, I'm just going to shoot gray on them anyway, because even if the sun is hitting these at whatever angle of the day, pretty much, it's going to be a variation of gray, but it's going to get direct light on it. But you're never going to get direct light underneath ledges and engravings and cracks and crevices and reveals and so forth. So that's why you want to allow the umber to stay in there, to play in that area, because it'll enhance the shadow, right? So I'm just going to shoot across here like this just to sort of see what happens. And like I say, you might, it might not always go as planned. Like, you might like it darker, right? And then you just leave it, you know. So shoot some down here. And try to go light. Like, remember how I told you, like, this is how you want to sort of by default be shooting your paint out of your airbrush. And then you can bring it on, see? And then come back further, you know, right? As you increase paint, if you need to. It's always there with the dual action. You can always increase your paint volume, but I never shoot like that unless I go way back and I want to just sort of give a dusting or something. I'll, you know, really heavy or something like that. But when I'm in close, you know, when you get in really close and you're sort of etch painting, then you just want to be shooting it like this, right? Because that way you can create really neat effects, blending effects, all right? That's one of the power features of the airbrush, is that, you know, the ability to blend acrylics, right? I mean, obviously with oil paints you don't have to, because you can just blend it with a traditional brush, but so just back and forth. I usually stop at each pass usually when I shoot like this. But when you're doing a tiny amount like that, you don't have to take your finger off the air of the paint. You can just keep, as long as you keep moving the brush. Right? That's what an airbrush is, right? Like, an airbrush is this. But you're using air to shoot your paint. Right? And you don't have to dip your brush because it's got a cup. And you can do stuff, of course, with an airbrush that you can't with a traditional brush, most notably with acrylics, which dry very quickly, which that is an advantage to doing this kind of thing. Okay, so we're going to shoot a little bit more gray. And one other reason, too, for doing this tiny amount, yeah, I just give it a quick, just to, because the tip gets clogged a bit. That's the only time I floor it, is to clear the tip like that, and then I come back and it's lubed up and nice again. So see, I don't know if you can see that, but on the top I didn't totally cover. There's some of the umber showing through and some of the white even. Looks kind of cool, eh? You could almost leave it like that too if you wanted to. Like, if you like what you see with just a few light layers, then just live with it. Like, leave it. All right, don't get, well, I'm not going to say don't get anything, because when you first get into an airbrush and you start getting, you know, a little proficient at it, it's a lot of fun and you don't want to stop. But the trick is to use less amount of paint if you can. You know what? There's a funny kind of blend on the top there like that. I think I'm going to leave it. See that? It's the IPA, heavy IPA in there, with a type of oxidizing. See, when you take the minimalist approach, you can see those kind of things developing. Okay, you know, I'm going to leave that now. I could put more on it, but I actually really like that. Boy, that blue looks nice. I like that blue gray. I didn't know it would look like that over the umber. I think I'm going to leave that. Okay, we'll have a look at the highlight color now, okay? Okay, so now we're going to put on a bit of highlight. In this case, I'm going to use Deck 10, and I've really thinned this down. Like, I really like to thin. As I go lighter, I like to go more thin. Like thinner, 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 from dark. Dark's a bit heavier, thinner, thinner, thinner. If you can just think of that rule. Like if you have, because the problem is if it's too heavy, like if you're getting a sandy, speckly finish, then the paint's too heavy. It's the first rule of thumb. It's too heavy. It's spitting. You're spitting pigment. So the beauty of IPA is it just a beautiful solvent for acrylic, and it just cuts it right down and suspends it nice. But you got to keep it like shake it up. Like don't just pull it from the shelf after a day and then pour it in your airbrush. You got to shake it up good, right? But I added more thinner on this. It was already fairly thin, but I topped it up. And like I said, I do this all the time. To me, it lasts me so long this way. All right, like I don't buy that, opinion that, oh, to me is too expensive or it's expensive. No, it isn't. Not if you thin it. If you use cheap IPA to thin it with, you can increase the volume of your paint 6 times over, like per volume, like bottle. Like you can turn one of these and get 6 of these out of it. If you're airbrushing, you'll never be able to do it with this. To me, it doesn't paint well with a traditional brush. You want to know why? Because it has like, if it has IPA and you're dipping it in the bottle and you're going like this, you're going to cut through the layer underneath because the IPA will eat right through it and you just make a mess of everything. That's why I don't usually use this paint with a traditional brush unless it's a wash on terrain or concrete or something, and then I want that to happen. But it's not really designed, like to me it's designed for airbrush, really. That's why I use Vallejo Air or the other equivalent Vallejo with a traditional brush, because it doesn't do that. Because it's not the sort of alcohol-based paint. Now, if you use to me, a thinner, I'm not sure, but I never use it. I haven't used it in 25 years, so I forgot, what its properties are exactly. But okay, so now I got some of this light stone kind of light, and this is like, you're not going to need much of this. It's all going to be over in no time, right? The trick here is to use just a little bit, and this is probably too heavy. I really thin that paint down, and look at, like, watch how I can cover this gray with it. See? Somebody's V8 down the road there. Sounds awesome. But anyway, okay, so let's throw a little bit on here. Really light. The sun's coming down. It's spilling. I'm going to leave a little bit darker down the base there. Just feather that out. Now it's very thin too, so it's not going to cover like an opaque covering, right? So let's look at the top of this here. And the nice thing about, to me, is after this is done, you can take Vallejo with some water and put some washes on it, like I showed you in some earlier methods. You can keep adding multiple layers until you like it. Here, let's go along the top here. you know, there's something about unmasking. You know, as you build and you paint and you mask and you think you're building through your model through, and it slowly starts to come to life right before your very eyes. Every modeler's experience is like this, no matter what the building is. It could be a trackside shanty. It could be an outhouse. I'm not kidding you. An old derelict grain elevator, just a warehouse flat, a little speeder shack. It doesn't matter what it is, right? If you put, you know, some soul into it and just treat it as one model that's the most important to you. So I just want to encourage all of you, you know, whatever that building is, it could be a kit too, right? Like it could be, here, let me just show you something. It could be one of these. Take your time, build it, paint it, enjoy it. It's all one and the same in the end, right? You end up with a model that you really enjoy, and there are a lot of, you know, there's a lot of satisfaction. This would make a nice, since I brought it up, this would make a nice background building for that, wouldn't it? Eh? What do you think? That's what I was thinking. These are great kits, these DPM. I don't know how available they still are, but if you see them, you know, it's good to snap one or two up now and again. I got a few of them, so I might use a couple of these just for you know, like a background kind of, sort of 3/4 kind of building, you know. Anyway.